Good evening, everyone. Lindsay Baker here with the Action Hour. I'm here with Skylar Thomas. Skylar, what is going on? From what I understand from the last time you were here, 254 elk have died of thirst. That happened. That was supposed to never happen again, and apparently it's happening again. Is that true?
The number that you stated was the number from the previous drought, the previous die-off. That drought scenario that was so terrible and 50% of the elk herd died is happening again. You would think something like that wouldn't happen again, but it's happening now. There aren't any official numbers right now. There are only the numbers that citizens have gone out and gotten themselves, because we had the warning sign from how the Park Service responded to this situation last time. And now we're like, well, we're not going to just let that happen again. So people are actually going out there and checking things out and seeing whether or not these elk are dying and what the living situation is for them behind that fence.
For people that haven't seen it before, let's just backtrack so they know what we're talking about.
When you come across something like this, it's tempting for people to go to a safe place, dismiss this as a wild animal, a non-human, rather than to put yourself in that animal's shoes and imagine what it went through. Matthew saw an elk nearly get stuck and barely escape. Obviously, these animals weren't so lucky. So what were those last hours like? Were predators moving in on them? Were flies already starting to gather on them before they'd even lost their last breaths? And what were they doing in a predicament like that in the first place? The park's wildlife ecologist on the radio just said dismissively that the rest of us need to understand that these are animals that adapted with the land and know how to deal with the landscape. They know how to find water and survive. Does that include this? 2 elk died in one pond. And it's not like this was a baby. It's not like this was an inexperienced animal. This is a sign of desperation. Animals trying to get water in an area that was a potential death trap.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah, that's a good one to start with, because you heard mention Matthew. Matthew Pulverosa Klein is a West Marin resident who is very concerned about what he's seeing out there. He's a wildlife enthusiast and photographer, and he keeps coming across these corpses out there. And he and I met through our mutual effort in our concern for Point Reyes, and we went out there together and started documenting these things. And I believe it was September 23rd, I was on a local radio show where I was allowed to voice my concerns and the concerns of other people fighting for the seashore. And then the Park Service staff came on after me and said that we were all spreading misinformation and that everything was fine out there. And they made sure to plug the ranchers and say, hey, the seashore wouldn't even exist without the ranchers, which is not true, by the way. Well, there's your Park Service staff actually being inaccurate on the radio and misinforming the public in multiple ways. But
for one thing, isn't it the tourism that brings the revenue to the park? Isn't that what brings it, the tourism? Rather than
they like to. Right. It's often touted to the public that it's important for the economy for these dairies to be producing their products and have, their employees that are out there. But that is absolutely eclipsed by the money that is brought in by the very existence of the park, the attraction of nature itself, the rare gem that is there and that was preserved by the creation of this seashore is what attracts people out there and what has stimulated the local economies, the little towns in the area.
Now you said I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we decided at the end of that broadcast, the Park Service put out their map of adequate water that they sent out to everyone saying, see, there's nothing to worry about. And this map had all these nice looking, refreshing blue dots all over it saying, hey, these elk have plenty of water. So this what that clip you showed was one segment of Matthew and I going out through the entire elk reserve and seeing whether or not there's actually water at these spots that the Park Service is telling everyone, hey, look, everything's great. So that was a death hole. There were corpses of elk in there and everything else was disgusting mud. On the map, that's a nice, refreshing looking blue dot. That's a pond, as a matter of fact. So we're just trying to give people a little taste of reality by going out there and actually looking at these things.
Right. And speaking of looking at it, we'd like to show the public. So which of these adequate water? I also have Bad Joke, which is your second video you sent me. Which of those do you think we should show next?
Bad Joke. Which one is bad?
Let's just play.
Last week in the Adequate Water series, we explored the fence line on the eastern side of Pierce Point Road, featuring 2 elk corpses, at least one of which had clearly died because of the fence. This episode explores the fence line on the west side of Pierce Point Road. And if you thought the last episode was disturbing, well, buckle up. I also asked viewers to try and figure out what they were seeing in this footage. Indeed, it's pretty confusing, and that's because it doesn't make any sense. But not much does in Point Reyes these days. Maybe it's easiest to try and explain this by starting with a map. Alright, this is Pierce Point Road in the National Seashore, and this black line is the elk fence, the barrier between the ranch land and the elk reserve. You can see the border very clearly where there's death and where there's biodiversity. This side, the eastern side, is where Matt and I found the corpses of 2 elk right on the fence line. Now, when I say the western side, I'm referring to this elk fence. And when I asked you to explain what you were seeing in that footage, Matt and I were walking along here, and many of you guessed correctly that this was ranch land, indicated by how ugly and void of biodiversity it was. But you also noticed that this area wasn't looking particularly good. But most of you didn't mention that you could see a fence back here as well, or how good this looked. That's worth stopping really quick to give you another perspective. This is me standing within the elk reserve, looking back out toward the ranch land. Basically, that's coyote brush in the foreground, and in the background is the product of an extractive, outdated industry.
So, is that a good one to start on?
There's a lot to There's a lot to unpack there, and if anyone's interested to see the full versions, they're on my website. There was so much to unpack that it had to be turned into series. But Matthew and I were going along and trying to find water sources along that fence, and I might as well say it now because we probably don't have time to get to it. But funny enough, one of the water sources on the Park Service's map is on the rancher side of the elk fence. So there's this fence creating a barrier right at the seep that's marked as a water source for the elk. So they're actually blocked.
The water cow video? I have the water cow video if you want to show that. Is that the one?
Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Sorry.
But also along that same fence, we found 2 more dead elk, and one of which still had its antlers caught in the wire of the fence. And you can see the state of that fence. It's not being kept up or maintained. It doesn't appear to be any pride in the park. So an animal died because of that, trapped, unable to get away from the fence. Mm-hmm. Then we go to the other side of the road, and there was a part where I asked viewers, what do you think you're seeing here? And there were multiple fences intersecting. And the sad story is that a new fence was built that was going to be easier for the Park Service to maintain. And in a way that could have been good news because it gave a little bit more acreage to the Tule Elk. But then they never took down the old fence. So now you have a fence inside of a fence. And access wasn't really ever given to the animals because the old fence wasn't taken down, but it is now in a state of dilapidation where it's creating a wildlife hazard. And so Matthew and I went ahead and walked the full length of that, and we're just, we were blown away at the state of this fence. And I called the Park Service and asked about it, and the person I spoke to said she was unaware that the old fence was still up. And also in there, we found barbed wire. So the lack of water was the goal of us going out there, but then we kept encountering all these other obstacles facing these.
I have a little clip of the old fence still up. You want to show that? It shows exactly what you were saying. Let me just show that.
Back in this direction, and then more recently, I don't know how many years it's been now, if it's been even just over a year, I came out here and they had these big posts and this new fence going this direction and around. So they actually gave the Tule Elk a few more acres of coastal prairie, although it's degraded cow pasture that needs to be recovered as coastal prairie, hopefully in time. But look at this. This was just left behind. And they do it, you can see other areas where it's been left behind, and it goes right through the heart of this coastal prairie area here, this coyote brush area here.
I did call the Park Service and spoke to the outreach coordinator, who said that the new fence had been put up within the last 5 years. She was actually unaware that the old fence was still up. The rust, the dilapidation, the amount of brush growing through the fence all give you clues of how long it's been in this state.
There you go.
Sorry, I wouldn't have said all that.
I think it's good to show it, and then it's just proving what you're saying is true. So you're telling the truth. You said you had some quotes you want to go into. One about, you said that there was the first quote from the legislative history to prove that ranching, that one was never intended for the seashore.
Sure. Before we jump in that, I'll give a little background about why that's relevant. When concerned citizens write to the Park Service or are on social media or even call, and when their arguments start to run out of steam, they end up saying, well, the legislation says that we're supposed to have ranching in the seashore, so we need to work with the ranchers. And basically it's an excuse, it's a justification to allow these crimes against nature to take place because it's their job. Our Park Service staff, it's their job to battle against nature, as crazy as that sounds. But the problem with that is that it's not even true. The legislation did not intend for ranching to continue in the seashore. And it actually took years of lobbying by ranchers to get amendments that allowed them to extend their leases past the original expiration dates. And remember, these people were paid for this land, and then they did not leave. But if you want the quotes that help settle the debate, and this can be found on the Park Service's website, is called An Administrative History of Point Reyes National Seashore. And I will just read a few. These are direct quotes
on their website, right off their website. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Great.
These are not my words. These are quotes. The study narrative, they did a survey in their proposition to create the park. The study narrative gave little attention to the ranches, noting only that the private holdings of the larger ranches prevented the public from gaining any conception of the physical beauty of the region. The report made no recommendations for preserving the agricultural tradition or the active dairy operations on the peninsula. The ranches and dairies were not elements that the National Park Service, most seashore supporters, and legislators initially sought to protect within the scope of the National Seashore premise. They did not offer protection of dairy and cattle ranches as an objective in establishing the National Seashore. These are direct quotes. These aren't my words again. One only need to replace the cows with elk, and the scene would be that which met the eyes of the adventurers of the 16th century.
Wow.
Worth and Dunshee anticipated that the ranches would eventually go away once that process was completed. And instead of the original intent taking place, the Marin County Board of Supervisors was approached by a coalition of ranchers who said, don't let this park happen. And in fact, the ranchers fought tooth and nail for making this seashore happen. And there is another document full of some pretty comical yet sad quotes of their congressional testimony when they actually went in person to fight against the creation of the seashore.
And we do want to say that we invite the Park Services on at any time, and Jane on Jane has contacted them, and to date they have not replied. We have offered to have them on and give their side of the story, and of course we invite any of the parties named today on to give their side of the story. And everything that we are talking about right now is verifiable by going out and checking on their website and et cetera, sources that you are providing to us. So this is definitely information that you're just not getting from your fantasy friend up in the sky or something like that. I mean, you've really documented, you've spent, how much time have you spent over the last, has it been more than a year now? I know it's been several months.
It's been over 2 years. It's been 2 years now. Yeah, it was
on this
just
project. But you do this, it's your life work, I understand. You do it with
well,
with
it was
shop.
never it was not, yeah, it was never, Point Reyes was never intended to be this long. It was just you know, I saw something out there that upset me so badly that I did a short expressing why it didn't seem right, and then it just led down this hole of finding out more and more and more bad things that were taking place out there. And it almost sounds, you know, too far-fetched to be true once you hear the entire story.
Right. And people can hear the story on they can watch your movie, The Shame of Point Reyes, and they can go where we have the Instagram link here, but we have our wonderful Sarah Siegel as our moderator, and she is putting up links. So if you want to mention any link, she's available to put that up so the folks can get it. So
the film itself, you can go straight to shameofpointreyes.org, and the free YouTube videos embedded there. And if you want to follow the entire Adequate Water series, which is the current focus, that's the same website, just /water. And all the episodes are on that one page, which shows Matthew and I going through the park and discovering what these water sources actually look like, and all the corpses of the elk that we're finding in the barbed wire and all the other things that we're discovering.
You have some highlights of the water photos you've taken. There's no sound. Would you like to play that and then talk about it afterwards? Yeah, okay.
Sure. Marked as a water source, but it's actually blocked by the fence.
Unfortunately, the whole time you were talking, because the video is on, you were muted. So anything you said, you might want to repeat.
Oh,
sorry, but we're muted. We're muted automatically.
Oh, okay. Well,
so what were we seeing? I saw a lot of dead animals. I saw a lot of dead elk. I saw mud holes. I didn't see any water holes. And that was what they were.
Yeah.
You know, where the water holes.
You saw a lot of clips from what we call Central Pond 2, and that's where Matthew and I filmed the 2 dead elk corpses. And, when that clip was playing and it showed how disgusting the water is, I just invited viewers to think, under what conditions would you ever be, tempted to take a drink of water from that? And I understand wild animals are different than we are and better adapted, but that was disgusting. Not only was it just muddy and algae filled, but it was also filled with, rotting flesh of animals. And this is what these elk are reduced to. In fact, the Park Service updated their website to say that another elk was found in that pond, and they went ahead and attempted to rescue it. It ended up dying anyway. But, they, on one hand, they say, hey, these elk have plenty of water out there and they know how to survive. On the other hand, these animals are putting themselves in mortal situations. And is that the action of an animal that has plenty of water sources? Do you go into a mud hole? And those are their words. They actually, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but they use the word mud hole to describe their own water source.
So that's insane. I mean, we see here a picture of one almost getting tangled into the fence, trying to hop over it, probably trying to get to water or food source.
That one did drop to its knees in the rest of the photo clips. That was not, directly related to a water source. That's barbed wire that is all over the park, and they're actually going to increase the amount of fencing in their new plan rather than decrease it. This is the direction that your national seashore is going.
But what I don't understand, we have all of these major media outlets running stories on this. The public outcry is that they do not want this happening. And by the way, are people still bringing water in? Are these elks getting any relief whatsoever at this time? Or is that all not even happening either?
Well, I couldn't say. Some people are acting on their own. I wasn't actually part of that first water drop. It's hard to say whether the elk would positively respond to a foreign object like that being brought in, but you can't blame people for trying. And I just wish that we would see that sort of enthusiasm from a Park Service instead of a public who feels so desperate that they feel the need to try and do something themselves. In fact, the Park Service removed the first attempt to bring in water. Now, the amount of effort it took to remove that water, they could have just gone ahead and found a way to provide water to these elk.
So what their statement is that they can't interfere with nature. That's what the legislation says. Is that part of it?
That brings up a great little mini topic. This is exactly what went down last time. It started with people being concerned and the Park Service saying there's nothing to be concerned about. Hey, we're monitoring the situation. And it escalated and more elk were dying and the drought continued and the drought conditions continued. And so people continued to voice their concerns. And eventually the Park Service referred to the 98 Tule Elk management plan that said, we're not supposed to interfere with nature. But which means that no matter how long they distract the public by saying, hey, we're monitoring the situation, we'll do something if we need to do something. Oh, but by the way, we actually won't do something because our management plan says we can't. So we're being led down the primrose path. We're chasing our tails. And then they talk about a contingency plan. A wildlife advocacy company stepped in last time and said, look, this is not good. And they said, we are looking into options of bringing in water for the elk. They never did it. Mm-hmm. The end result of the last drought was no action taken by the Park Service and 50% of that enclosed herd dying. People need to remember, if you're new to this, these elk are behind a fence. They don't have a fighting chance to go and find better habitat, better forage, better water. The exact same thing is happening now, and I've been taking down these quotes that they're sending out. almost verbatim. It's like, oh, we're watching the situation carefully. There's plenty of water. You don't need to worry about it, on and on and on. And then when the public pushes further, they say, well, the 98 management plan says we can't interfere. And then talk of a contingency plan. We have a contingency plan in place, and stating that a contingency plan was in place in writing took place before I confronted the Park Service saying, where is this contingency plan? At which time the person I was speaking to changed the story to, we're working on a contingency plan. This contingency plan
on the website. You're saying the verbiage changed on the website.
Well, this was said to me. There was absolutely no form of a contingency plan whatsoever on the website. And it was when I finally said, look, where is it? I want to see it. Can people look at this thing? That the story changed to, well, we're working on one. Then when the website was updated, that contingency plan is one vague sentence. We will bring in a trough of water when we deem it necessary. Very scientific. So I'd like to know what took place from the last drought to this one. Where were the studies? Where was the preparation? Where did you try to learn about how to deal with something like this? And in fact, I also asked the Park Service, because they tell the public the elk have plenty of water. Well, what does plenty of water actually mean? And I spoke to two actual Tule Elk biologist specialists, one who actually studied in the park at one time. They said, look, where's the scientific proof? These are unfounded claims. And I asked a very, very basic question. How much water does an adult Tule elk need to survive on a daily basis? What do you think the Park Service's answer was?
I don't know.
They didn't know. They didn't know an answer that simple of an iconic species that they are charged with looking after. I guarantee you that they know how much water cattle require. And there's never a shortage of water for cattle there.
We have a video of that I want to show in a moment. But what can people do besides, I'm going to ask people that are watching to please share out this video and ask your friends that you share it with to share it. We want to get the word out. That's one way. But what can we do? Skylar, we need some hope here. What can we grab onto? What can we do to make this change?
Well, we do have people who are grounded in action plans. You can go to forelk.org. If you go to our social media campaigns and jump on and follow us and repost and retweet, the recurring challenge with this issue is that people, as horrific as it is, and as close to San Francisco as it is, this national park right here next to us, people have absolutely no idea what's happening. They just don't know. It's kept so quiet. It's impressive at how quiet it's kept.
And help with that. See, this is something we can do. It doesn't even cost money. We're at home now. We've got extra time in front of our computers. So yes, so we need to put up all those links and ask people to please follow and share the individuals that are carrying out this work. Absolutely, please.
And call out, if you're involved in any local nature organizations or conservancy programs, call them out, because many of them also cower to the ranching industry and won't stand against this. They won't take a public voice on this issue, whether they know it's wrong or not. And I think they need to be called out on that. And if you are involved in one of those organizations, bring it up. And don't be swayed by all this talk of cultural importance and whatever. This is mismanagement of land. This is mismanagement of a park. This is mismanagement of wildlife. And this is handing a private organization, a private money-making industry, everything they want on public land at our expense. No one should be cool with that. And the idea that we need to preserve ranching within a seashore for cultural purposes, what about the hundreds of ranches that you drove past on your way to the seashore? There is no shortage of understanding what agriculture looks like in our country. In fact, it's dominated by it, especially ranching and grazing. It's not only dominated by it, it has destroyed our national heritage.
The stench of it is
destroyed.
Yeah, when you drive through those areas, the stench is unbelievable. That's my own personal, like, that's my experience.
Exactly. I took someone out there recently to show them the seashore, and they'd seen my stuff, but they didn't believe it. They couldn't believe in their minds that it was that bad, and they couldn't believe the smell. He's like, I should be smelling the ocean. Instead, I smell manure. Lots and lots and lots of manure.
How is this being allowed to happen? This is incredible, because as you're saying, people don't know, and we do have to get the word out. We have to repeat it over and over and spread the word as much as we possibly can. Should we get into the video about the water cows? Let's just show people the difference.
All right, so we're going past the ranch there, and there's just one, that trough right there. That one trough right there has more water in it than the elk have in the reserve. There's another of the water holes for the cows. Doesn't look wonderful, and yet it's better than anything that the elk have. And remember, this is just one trip out there. There's another one. That one looks like it's a little bit more maintained. Maybe it was dredged recently. And there's another one in the background. That is way bigger than the only pond that still has water in it in the reserve.
Wow.
And there is another one from higher up on a hill, just as about to leave the Reyes Point roadside. You can see these troughs all over the landscape. So, there's no shortage of water for the cattle all over the place. And in addition to all of the ponds that can visibly be seen, all of these shots are taken from the road. These are bodies of water that are big enough that you can see without exiting your car. But in addition to that, they have their seeps, they have their streams, they have their creeks and the lagoons, even the ones that they aren't supposed to go into. Now, if we were to compare that to the Tule Elk Reserve, everything in the Tule Elk Reserve, you pretty much have to be standing on before you see even a hint of water. And that's what the Park Service is calling adequate. In the meantime, we have 5,000 cattle defecating in water sources and the rest of the seashore.
Wow. That is incredible. Oh my gosh. That just turns my stomach. Oh my God. I hope this word gets out. People, please help us get this word out. We need to make some changes. Now, we do have another video, and I understand that this is public domain video that you obtained, and it just set up what this meeting is that we're going to be watching.
Well, this explains your question about how something so unbelievable can be happening. This is a congressman that a lot of people entrust to have actually been on the side of wildlife, but has actually been a rancher apologist from the beginning. And this is him, a Democrat, and he is presenting his bill, which he tried to push through before the general management plan came out, so that despite any environmental impact statements, any violations, despite any evidence shown about how bad the ranching is in the seashore, that it would have been put into law that the ranchers got to stay there. This is the Democratic environmental congressman trying to do that. And this clip shows the reaction of the Republicans, who usually would be trying to do something as egregious as what he's doing. And they're actually, well, the clip speaks for itself. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's just play the clip.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure I understand what this bill does. So this bill actually protects ongoing commercial operations within the confines of a national seashore, and to the extent that you have species that may infringe on those commercial operations, the species are relocated. I just want to make sure I understand that. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman? Just say yes.
Look at Huffman. Just look at his face. Listen to the amount of silence. This is a man who knows what he's doing is wrong and is doing it anyway.
Okay.
You want some Tule Elk in Louisiana?
Yeah, can you make sausage out of them? I don't
I can answer that one, yes.
Thank you. I just look, I'm actually proud of you on this. And it's allowing for a national park to be managed in a way that's complementary to commercial activities. It relocates species when they potentially conflict with commercial operations. It's somewhat uncharacteristic. I'm proud of you, Mr. Huffman.
Are you proud of him too? If you support Huffman, pull your head right out of your ass.
Okay, I think
You didn't edit that very well.
I missed it. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, let people they saw it. You can see for themselves. That's public domain footage that we just showed. And again, we invite Senator Huffman or any of the individuals that are in that video on at any time on Jane Unchained to tell their side of the story or to address the issue and what is going to be done to protect this wildlife reserve that we entrusted, and we believe that it's being protected for us to go and bring our children, our grandchildren, and this just isn't going to be there. Is that what you're saying? I mean, unless action is taken soon, what will be the impact? We don't even know probably what the impact would be if we lost all those elk permanently. I mean, if all those elk went extinct there.
Well, it's way more than just the elk. You know, the ranching activity itself removes the core of biodiversity out there. They actually destroy native vegetation. They get rid of the habitat that the birds require. They get rid of the perennial plants, the ones that were part of California's coastal grasslands, the coastal prairie. You know, we have badgers out there, they have foxes out there, they have bobcats out there, coyotes, maybe a mountain lion. And it's really sad that rather than saying, you know, we want more wildlife and we should see this place flourish, that they're saying, ooh, too many wildlife. We need to cut back on the wildlife because our commercial cattle operations don't like it. And that's the only reason. There's no other argument to get rid of wildlife. You know, everyone wants to talk about regenerative farming now. Regeneration is real, but only when it uses nature. It's amazing what happens when you just stand back and let nature do its work. And that happens through using native grazers like elk, like antelope, not cattle. Cattle have absolutely nothing to do with nature. And it shows in their impact on the land.
I was told by a horse racer, a man that owned race horses, and that if there weren't any cattle, that the land would become overgrown and they had to be there to you know, the exact opposite. They have that argument that they present. But when you look just here, the evidence is here. When you look at the fence and you look at the side that looks like, you know, the wasteland of hell, and that's the cattle grazing side where it's been decimated, everything is dead and on the and full of stench and manure and everything. And then on the other side, what's left of this, and they're closing in on that and completely destroying it eventually.
Well, and a few things about the overgrazing. If we have to choose between what the ranchers have produced, which is the hell that you just described, and overgrown vegetation, I'll take overgrown vegetation. But what's really missing from that argument is that no one ever talks about allowing native animals to control that vegetation. They only want to use their domesticated livestock. They only want to use their commodity animals because it's a business. It's not an interest in restoring nature. Otherwise, you would let native animals do the work. But no, even in a national park, we don't have room for the native grazers.
It's become that bad, hasn't it? You would think that would be, it's their sanctuary. It's like their safe place. Like, I don't know. It's just crazy.
Well, it makes you pretty worried about the state of animals elsewhere if this is what the ones inside of a national seashore are facing.
Yeah. Wow. So is there anything else that you would like to share? We're just about towards the end of the hour here. Is there anything else you would like to share? Anything you'd like to ask people to do or what they can learn or anything
well,
like that?
I would invite people to send me questions because, you know, this became a much more educational experience for me than I ever intended for it to be. You know, I'm now, you know, enrolled in ecology classes. It's quite fascinating. But in order to talk about the things that I talk about and not just be, you know, making things up, you know, I've actually had to come to understand what a native plant is or what a perennial plant is and how those plants interact with native animals. And it's really quite fascinating. Nature has a system and people don't necessarily understand that, but people don't have to understand it for it to work. We just need to get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
And pretending that the problem is the solution is ridiculous, but that's what we're facing today with all this greenwashing. And as the earth is dying from forests being chopped down and burned down, etc., mostly for cattle grazing, we're being told that what the earth needs to survive is more cattle grazing. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But if you don't know anything about ecology or the earth, and you know what? We humans are becoming more disconnected all the time. We've got our little bubbles of our phones and our work and our jobs and our families. And why would we know about the earth? So unfortunately, that makes us very susceptible to grasp onto whatever we hear on YouTube or on Facebook or on the news. And it's just, if you look at it at its roots, it just doesn't make sense. We're saying that humans knew better than nature did. We're saying that what California needed all along was 5 to 6 million cattle, and get rid of the grizzly bears and get rid of the wolves, get rid of the other animals. Nature had it wrong the whole time. And these damn trees and all their leaves, that's the problem. We need to get rid of all of those too. It just doesn't make sense. But it does make sense from the people who profit from telling those stories, because what do? They clear out land. What does that land become? Grazing land. Who profits from that? The people who are grazing their commodity animals on that land.
Yeah.
And that is the story across the United States. And unfortunately, it's the story inside of a national seashore.
Which is really disturbing. Well, another thing people can do is not eat meat. I mean, if the demand was not there, then there would not be as many cattle ranchers. They would soon go into another business where they can make profit, because profit is the main thing. So it's part of what we can do is spreading the word to people, because all the stories seem to lead back to the same source. Every time I do a story, it goes back to, animal agriculture. It has such an impact. It's so far reaching in so many ways.
It is. This Park Service, the writing is on the wall with these industries. They're dying off. And the only way that they're surviving, as long as they are, is through government subsidies. We are propping up these industries with our own tax dollars while simultaneously saying, what else can we do to help these poor people? They are hurting us. They're hurting the land, they're hurting the animals, they're hurting our economy. And we've been so indoctrinated with this idea that we can't question that industry, that we still, after all that, are like, oh, but the poor farmers. Well, you're going to see in the new cut of the film, they are not the poor farmers. They actually own most of Marin County. And that is another answer for how this is taking place out there. There is a lot of power. But why? Why are they so stubborn? Why won't they move on to new, more sustainable industries? People get turned off. A lot of people get turned off if you talk about veganism or veganic farming, because it's just not how they were raised. So even though I have adopted that lifestyle myself, I don't throw that out there. The bottom line is that if you stop supporting those industries, everything else falls in line.
That's right.
If we weren't desperately trying to use all that land to make gigantic cattle that are alive for one reason and one reason only, and that's to die, that's to be killed.
Lives.
For a product. Yes. If you use a tiny, tiny fraction of the land out there that's being used for cattle grazing and raise human crops, and you immediately have solved the food problem. You have replaced the amount of food that you're producing through those dairy cows and those beef cows. And half of that land out there is used for growing surplus crops that go to feed the cattle. And then you constantly have semi trucks coming in, bringing in more supplemental food. It's just this incredibly unsustainable industry that is revolving around making these cows grow just to be killed. And that is not about solving hunger. It's incredibly unsustainable, but it's also
bad for you. Oops, you froze. The diet is unhealthy. We've seen that. The World Health Organization classifies processed meat as a #1 carcinogen, I believe. I'm not exactly sure if I'm quoting that right, but we lost Skylar for a second. Skylar, go back out and come back. There you are. You're back. Great. So I was just giving some, we know that meat is not healthy. We've known for a long time causes heart disease, high blood pressure, clogged arteries, erectile dysfunction, which leads to, it was the first sign that we know that if that's happening, then other things are getting clogged, which could lead to death. So we know it's unhealthy. Why doesn't the public, persist? Even if they would just, meatless Mondays, folks. That's doable.
Well, if you don't want to believe it, you're not going to believe it. You can find, and especially with the money in the animal ag industry, you can find just as many articles still being published claiming that it is good for you, to go against the independent studies saying that it's not good for you. And, if people have decided that they don't want to stop eating something that they've eaten their whole lives, and they're going to go the path of the information that supports what they want to do. So I don't even try and argue the health aspect of it anymore. But this idea that you are trying to solve a hunger problem or feed the people with a food that is unaffordable for most people, and cheese is how we're going to, specialty cheeses. That's how we're going to solve hunger problems. That's your goal, Mr. Altruistic Farmer. I'm doing all of this because I'm worried about people's hunger. Or how about veal? How about veal as a side product coming out of there? That's baby flesh, babies that were stolen from their mothers and aren't allowed to move. Yeah. That's horrific, but it sure as hell isn't the goal of solving hunger issues. You know what I mean? So that's just the first thing you have to do is stop being full of crap.
Misinformation.
And stop believing what you want to believe, like believing that baby cows of all animals are the mammals that don't need their moms. They're just fine. Pull them away. The pregnancy secretions, the lactations of a gigantic bovine. Well, that was meant for adult humans to eat their entire lives. Clearly. I mean,
many people tell me that they've gone vegan recently, younger people that I know from other social media sites. Immediately their skin clears up. First thing that happens. And they're so happy.
I tell you what, if I could, I wish I could sue the industry, because I wonder how many of my zits and how much of the mucus that I had growing up was because I drank so much milk. I was always blowing my nose, and maybe I would have had clear, perfect skin growing up as a teenager.
I know. Who would have thought if we had just gone vegan sooner? And it's just like, it's so easy to go vegan. And there's so much fabulous food. Talk about cheeses, talk about, non-dairy cheeses, non-dairy ice cream. I mean, my mom moved in with me because of the corona. She had to come and stay with us. And I put her on a vegan diet. She doesn't even know half the time. I mean, most of the time, she doesn't know that she's eating vegan food. Mashed potatoes, everything. I mean, we have everything. So why? Why do we go this path?
I think about this a lot because I grew up in the Midwest, and there wasn't a second thought about it. It was meat and potatoes country, and I think a lot about the fact that I was never taught basic gardening. I never learned how to grow food, but we're all taught the importance of how to raise a commodity animal for slaughter. And, if you want to make an argument that we humans are supposed to eat meat or are supposed to eat both, go down that argument, but tell me why we leave the other one out completely. We grow up as adults and have no knowledge of food that we walk past on a daily basis. We're so proud of ourselves for being intelligent and superior, and yet we know nothing about our planet or how to survive if we were out in the wild, unless we have a weapon with us to kill an animal that we clearly aren't capable of killing without some form of manipulation, even though there would be plants right next to us that could feed us. That's right. Stupidity. How are
And
we so ingrained not
be
to?
independent, learn how to grow your own vegetables. No matter what, you have food. I mean, that's huge. That should be taught, as I'm sure you agree, to students in schools, in high schools. They should be taught. It's done a little bit, but not nearly as much as it should be.
No,
Everyone
but
can have a garden, and in fact, you can even now get these they're big kind of vases that feed you for an entire year, and they send you the plants. We've done a show on them. So you can be an urban gardener, grow all your own vegetables to eat, grow your own food year round with very little effort.
I currently live in a place that has a very small yard, so I had to get pretty creative, but it's amazing what nature will provide for you. I built a little box garden, and a little bit of work and a little bit of understanding plants, and you can provide. Imagine taking the acreage that one cow requires to eat the grass and destroy any chance of anything ever growing back there. By the way, you immediately ended any chance of that ground producing something for you next year in your attempt to give that cattle some grass. In that same amount of acreage, you would have a surplus of food if you wanted to grow a veganic garden. It's just shockingly unsustainable.
And I think we're moving that way. It's just changing minds take a while. And of course, for us, it's way too slow. But I can say on a positive note that I started my journey as vegan 6 years ago, and I've seen a tremendous growth. And at first, nobody even knew what vegan was practically. And the foods were limited. There's new vegan products going out all the time. And I just had a fabulous Thanksgiving, cruelty free. I'm sure you did. So,
yeah,
people just need to find out. So we got to get the word out.
Well, you brought up something interesting, because people are catching on. The movement's catching on. And yet the people that you would hope would be on the side of wildlife are stubbornly against it, because not only are they not trying to move ranching out of the seashore, but the diversification that they are offering to those ranchers is, again, animal ag, just more animals to raise for slaughter. It's get with the current times. Join the future. And if all of this is because of culture or history, or my family did this for X years and that year, how terrible of an excuse is that? How selfish and disgusting of an excuse is that? What other industry can you apply that to? Well, my grandpa did it, so I think I should be allowed to do it forever and ever, no matter how terrible it is. But that's pretty much the excuse and justification for doing this.
There's lots of horrific things we've done, and we wouldn't think of doing them now, as we grow and become more conscious. But it's just, it just doesn't make sense. But we are just about at the end of our time. It's been great having you on, and I would like you to come back, keep us posted. Again, as people follow and share your videos, follow you on social and the other organizations, which if there's any other links, Skylar, that we should have to add to this broadcast, just send them over. I'll put them in, people can see them. And we'll be sharing this out as well on other platforms. Actually, it's going out on several platforms right now. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of people putting in a lot of work and a lot of effort doing their own research, and they have to attend public meetings and call out the organizations that are in charge of whether or not something like this goes through. So a shout out to all of them. Too many to name, but I'll include links for all these people to follow, and please share. And if you have a question about it, because a lot of misinformation has been spread over the last 5 decades by the Park Service, unfortunately, and by the ranchers. And I have spent the last 2 years debunking this and finding out the truth. So if you want to know details about one particular aspect of propaganda that you've been told, please send me that question.
Perfect. That sounds great. Well, we thank you for being on tonight, and we hope that everyone got a lot of information. They're going to take it to heart. Help us share this out. Let's get this out to the public. Let's stop this. Let's save these poor elk. They need to get their water, and we need to help them. So Please join us. Thank you for being on tonight, Skylar. And
Thank
folks,
you.
thank you. And I'll see you next time, next Tuesday night, same time, same place.
Thank
Bye-bye.